welcome again to my corner office, where we're going to talk a little bit about winding down the garden for realsies. That's where we are. It's November, and I'm kind of amazed that I still have roses blooming, and some flowers still holding on for dear life, but we have for sure had our first frosts. And that, if you've watched some of my other videos, will be the little cue to you to remember that when the frosts happen, certain plants are going to liquefy, and it's also time to think about bulbs. If I was saving my dahlias, my dahlia bulbs, then I'd want to get them out of the ground now before too many frosts happen. Like right now, if I took you outside, which I forgot to do, if I took you outside and showed you the dahlia leaves right now, they would look like 6-week-old lettuce in your fridge. Pretty much melted down. But the bulbs are probably still fine because the soil itself is our insulation, and it buys us some time. You're probably well aware, if you live in a temperate climate like I do here in Michigan, that the air and things exposed to the air freeze a lot faster than the ground freezes. But once it starts getting cold enough at night for things above the topsoil to freeze, it's just a matter of time before the soil itself freezes. So the clock is ticking. Any bulbs that you would want to save over the winter, now would be the time that I would start here in Zone 6B. Again, in a temperate climate, I would be getting those bulbs out of the ground and start drying them out to store them down. I'm not going to store my dahlias this year because I'm kind of mad at them for not blooming much, although that's probably my fault. I think after asking some more expert gardeners and thinking about what I did, I think the culprit was my soil. It was actually too fertilized. I grew it in Miracle-Gro soil, my dahlias, and apparently that can actually suppress blooms, which makes sense why my leaves on the dahlias looked amazing, but I didn't get many blooms. Anyway, I'm not happy with them, and I could choose to store down the bulbs and grow them again next year, but I already took advantage of a dahlia sale and bought a whole different set of dahlias for next year. So that's my choice when it comes to dahlias. I'm not saving them. I'm also not saving my canna bulbs, because I'm mad at them too because they were really short, my Tropicana cannas. So not saving those. Cool. What am I saving? Mostly seeds. I am hoping to have a little video to show you how I save seeds, but today I want to talk about actually what's going to seem counterintuitive based on what I just talked about getting bulbs out of the ground. And that is that spring bulbs, bulbs that are going to stay dormant until the spring, now is when you want to plant them, before the soil freezes. And so that, for me, it means tulips and daffodils, crocuses, alliums that are spring blooming. Earlier this summer, I took advantage of other bulb plant sales. I'm always looking for plant sales, and planned out and bought my whole collection of spring bulbs for next year. So it was important, while it's cold enough that the spring bulbs won't break dormancy. Like, they need to know that it's winter and feel in their little bulb hearts that it's not time to wake up. Like, it needs to be that cold, but it can't be so cold that the ground is frozen, because then I can't put them in the ground, obviously. So today what I actually want to show you is a really, it was a gargantuan effort for me to get all of the bulbs into the ground that I wanted to get in the ground or into containers this weekend, while the weather dipped back up a little bit so it was warm enough to play outside. I'm going to ask for your good grace here as far as the cinematography goes, because it's daylight savings time, which means by the time I got around to actually doing all this planting yesterday, it was already darker than I thought it should be based on the time of the clock. So I'm kind of going to go back and forth between the video clips that I grabbed of what I was doing when and me explaining it. I think I'm going to try it that way. In the future, I might get fancier and try to just do like a nice Ken Burns style voiceover. but I don't have that ready for you today. That's just not where we are. Anyway, I'm going to show you planting bulbs for spring in two different ways that I use. One is in the ground, which I would say the pros and cons there. Putting bulbs in the ground is a pro in the sense of you have a lot of insulation. Like I said, the soil is the insulation against total freeze over. The ground is going to freeze, at least here in Michigan. It's definitely going to freeze, but it's not going to be like permafrost that you would get up near the Arctic Circle or anything. Tulips and daffodils and other spring bulbs to, for the most part, expect to have those kind of conditions. And it won't be so extreme if it's in the ground because there's a ton of ground around it. Digging it into the soil gives it some buffer. The con to putting things in the soil directly in the ground, I would say, is first of all, it's harder to do. Like it takes more effort depending on how often you work the soil, whether or not you're working around other perennial plants that you don't want to disturb the roots on. Also just roots in general. If you've got tree roots, that can be pretty difficult. And I guess the other con, and the one that I'm going to be looking out for, are squirrels. Rodents of various kinds may dig up your bulbs. So we'll see. I guess one other pro that I do want to point out for putting things in the ground is if they are daffodils, which have a tendency to naturalize, and that means like they settle in and become perennial, like year after year, they become more and more adjusted to where you've planted them and actually will start to double, maybe triple. That could be a great investment to put them in the ground. And I've actually taken some daffodils that I grew in containers the first year and popped them in the ground for the second year, and they continue to come up. So it's not like it's a permanent choice. But anyway, I would say that's another nice thing is that if your bulbs have a tendency to naturalize or be perennials, putting them in the ground means you might not have to dig that area and put them in again next year, and they'll grow and spread over time. So you can get away with fewer bulbs because over time they will multiply and you'll have a beautiful natural swath of spring color. Okay, so in the ground, I feel like I've gone all over what you can do in the ground, but one of my favorite ways to do spring bulbs too is in containers. Now, the main difference that I want to call out just right off the bat is that putting things in containers means putting bulbs in containers means you are surrounding them with less soil. That means that they have a much smaller, shorter blanket to keep them insulated against frost damage. And they also dry out more quickly than they would in the main soil. I guess that would have been a pro for putting them in the soil too, so you don't have to water them. So you need to keep in mind wherever you're going to put your containers, if you plant them with spring bulbs, you'll want it to be somewhere that is less likely to freeze if possible, because it's going to get a lot colder and they have a lot less protection when they're in even large containers filled with soil. Okay, so that would be, I'm starting with the cons for containers apparently. That would be a con for putting bulbs in containers, but other than that, there's a lot of pros, I would say. Pros are you use container soil, so it's really easy to work with. I mean, you can pack those containers full of bulbs, easily spread soil on top of them and work it. It's really easy. You can also take containers and put them places that are easier for you to work with them. Like if you have a bad back, for example, or just don't like to stoop too much, you could put them on a table and work with them that way. Although you might need someone with a little more strength to get them up there and move them around for you. There's always containers give you more versatility when it comes to like how you do your gardening and at what position. Okay. Also, it lets you put spring color in places where you might not otherwise have soil. Like I tend to put my containers right outside the door by our driveway because we go in and out of there a bajillion times, and it's nice to see the spring color as soon as we can. So again, it's that versatility of containers. Like I said, the big con, I would say, in this case is just you're gonna have to be really careful about where you store them. And if you live somewhere colder, like for example, Wisconsin, where I used to live, You might not be able to get away with leaving your containers outside all winter long. I have gotten away with it in Michigan because it's a little bit warmer, but I still feel like I saw a little bit of lower yield when I stored my containers outside the garage versus inside the garage. All things to think about. Okay, I feel like I've talked a ton, but I just wanted to say that planting spring bulbs, it always takes some time, but I feel like it's just one of the best investments you can make as a gardener, because one of the hardest times of year I know I go through is that part of the year when there is nothing blooming in the garden. Pretty much a couple weeks from now, and once the first frost sets in, everything starts to die off. And then it won't be till really maybe late February, but probably more March. And having spring bulbs planted means you have something guaranteed to break dormancy and start giving you cheer next year. It's a really wonderful time of year to give yourself that. I have other plants that will pop up before, like crocuses, for sure, and hellebores. But when it comes to like true bright pops of color, I feel like the tulips and the daffodils are where it's at. Okay. With that said, like, last thought, I started off this video with a little quick sketch that I did. I'm not a super amazing artist, but this phrase, dead but not for long, is what came up to me when I was doing all of my work in the soil yesterday, putting in bulbs. Those are my three of my little bulbs right there. One of the best things that I like about being in the garden is that working in the soil kind of lets my brain unhook a little bit. Something about focusing on repetitive movements and the tactile nature of the work. And that was just the phrase that came up again and again. I mean, there's something to me really sacred and beautiful about bulbs. Aside from giving yourself that hope that they're going to bloom in the spring, just full stop. Nature is amazing that we can go into periods of dormancy. It means different things to different creatures, but there's mammals, there's little ground squirrels that hibernate in the ground all winter long, actually go into a low metabolic state. I feel like all of us, with how 2020 went and how we're starting to emerge from it slowly, it can feel really weird, but it is actually kind of natural in a way. And that's kind of like, that was the phrase that came up to me again and again, like dead but not for long. I think a lot of us may have felt pretty numb and quiet and dormant, and now we're starting to get these chances to kind of peer out of our little houses and windows and live life. So that's just the vibe. That's what the bulbs gave me as a thought. And I'm amazed by them because they are going to come up in the spring. They're sleeping, they're dead, but not for long. Hold tight, folks. It'll be here before we know it. With that, let's get into digging. Enough of this metaphorical crap. All right, here are my lovely bulbs all laid out. This is how I get a sense of just how much work I have ahead of me. I've got tulips, daffodils, and over there are my daylilies. We're about to kick out some azaleas. Oh, also I have some crocuses. The sativa should be sort of like saffron. And then we also have this crocus rainbow mix. These things bloom early, so hopefully they'll give us cheer. Now there's the azaleas that are about to get booted out. They just don't do well in this location, so see ya. All right, so I've dug approximately 6-inch depth trough for my tulip bulbs to go in. This will be the swing mix tulips. And there they go. I just plop them in. 3 bags worth. I don't worry about sticking them upright. Nature finds a way. All right, and then next up I put in my daylilies. They like to be buried with their crown right at root at soil level, so I put in more dirt on top of the tulips and stacked these bad boys on top. 3 daylilies. And then to kind of continue the swoop of tulips, I dug another trough here. More tulips and crocuses. This is where the sativa crocus will go, along with more tulips. Look at that. Tucked in. Okay, and then finally out here, these petunias won't make it through winter, so I'm going to toss them out now to make room for more tulips,
which I didn't show you digging because you already saw it. All right, now we're along the rose border. I'm going to be planting my daffodils. This is the citrus sorbet mix of daffodils, a very cheerful variety that I'm going to dig in between my roses. And then that's them all tucked in. I was a little nervous about disrupting the roots. Okay, finally, we have the containers that right now have some really dead looking plants in them. But we're going to put in their place a tulip and allium mix called Raspberry Sundae, a tulip called Amazing Parrot, and then finally a tulip called Amazing Grace, which will be a nice double variety. Same color scheme. All right, so I've dumped out the old plants, filled my little whiskey barrels up with potting soil, and I've laid out my bulbs, as you can see, to get a sense of how I want to distribute them. And here we go. I've planted them, mostly keeping them towards the center so they have a nice little blanket of soil around them. There we go. And then I tuck them in with some more potting soil on top, and next I'm going to put them in the garage where they can be safe for winter.
Okay, so digging all those bulbs and getting them planted took me almost all day yesterday, and then editing this video took me, well, I was fitting it in on my lunch hour and things like that, but it took me most of today. So it's now dark again. Trying to get used to this time change is always kind of a circus. Anyway, we'll get there. Just like everything else, we adjust. Anyway, that's my video on planting spring blooming bulbs in the fall. Specifically putting them in the ground for tulips and daffodils and crocuses. And then also how to plant some bulbs in containers for the spring. We'll see how things go. Every year's a little bit different, and I definitely give myself the grace that if the weather outside gets to be different every year, then my success with my bulbs either freezing or getting eaten by squirrels or making it all the way through, it's not all in my hands at this point, but I've done the best I could. Anyway, that's the video. As always, if you like the content, please like and subscribe so that you can stay tuned. The content is gonna adapt a little bit as we are, again, winding down the growing season. We'll talk a little bit about how I plan my garden for next year, reasons that I like to keep gardening. Who knows what else? We'll kind of just like go with the flow in this year after 2020. Who knows? We kind of have to be game for anything. Anyway, my wish for you is that you leave this video remembering that we all go through phases in our life where we might have to go dormant, where we might have to go radio silent, be quiet and rest. It's all natural, and it's how we adapt to our environments. But you might feel kind of asleep, maybe not dead like I did in my drawing, dead but not for long. Maybe you just feel asleep but not for long. Whatever it is, it's okay. It's all a season, and it never stays the same for long. So take care. And in the comments down below, what I would love to know is, number one, are you planting anything for spring? Because I would love to hear and get inspired by you and what you're planting. And also, what, if any, weird thoughts have come up to you while you've been working in your garden? Like I said, dead but not for long is what came up when I was working through the soil. And I'm a little inspired, no doubt. So inspire me a little bit more with your findings. Anyway, take care.